Leto Narrator. A Reddit theory suggests Denis Villeneuve's Dune trilogy might be narrated by Leto II, speaking from thousands of years after the events unfold. Both Dune from 2021 and Dune Part 2 from 2024 open with a mysterious voiceover during the opening credits, described as so deep and disturbing it can barely be recognized as human. The theory, which has been discussed on Reddit and YouTube channels including Quinn's Ideas during 2024, proposes this voice belongs to Leto II, speaking from 3,500 years in the future during the God-Emperor of Dune timeline. At that point in the books, Leto has transformed into a worm-human hybrid and reigns as God-Emperor, possessing ancestral memories that allow him to remember all human history, even events thousands of years before his birth. Supporters of this theory suggest the final scene of Dune Part 3 could reveal Leto as the narrator, possibly speaking to his descendant Siona, transforming the trilogy into a meta-narrative about who controls history's story. This interpretation aligns with themes Herbert explored about prescience and narrative control, and gains credibility from Villeneuve's stated love of Dune Messiah, which focuses heavily on these concepts. While the voice hasn't been officially identified, and Villeneuve hasn't commented on this specific interpretation, the theory resonates with the broader thematic concerns of controlling historical narrative to determine the future. Clay disguise. Florence Pugh's character poster shows Princess Irulan with her face completely covered in cracked white clay, a detail that appears nowhere in Frank Herbert's books. The promotional poster released in March 2026 sparked immediate confusion among fans and book readers alike, prompting Pugh to acknowledge the mystery on Instagram with a teasing caption, asking fans to check out why Irulan has a clay mask, without actually explaining the reason. Since this specific visual doesn't appear in Dune Messiah source material, fans have developed several theories. The first suggests the clay serves as protection against face dancers like Scytale, who can shapeshift and steal the appearances of others, making a physical mask a simple defense. The second theory proposes it's a disguise when meeting co-conspirators in the plot against Paul, allowing her to move unrecognized. The third, more humorous explanation suggests it's simply a skincare routine for surviving Arrakis's harsh climate. Another poster shows Irulan with shaved hair, suggesting multiple dramatic visual transformations throughout the film. Even hardcore book readers are puzzled by this choice, making it one of the most mysterious creative decisions in the film, and signaling Villeneuve may be taking liberties with character appearances to serve plot elements not present in the original source material. Children integration. Casting teenage actors as Leto II and Ghanima has sparked intense debate about whether Dune Part 3 will compress elements from both Messiah and Children of Dune into one film. Nakoa Wolf Momoa, Jason Momoa's son making his acting debut, and Ida Brooke were announced in January 2026 to play the teenage versions of the twins, despite the fact that in the books, the twins are newborns at the end of Messiah and only 9 years old in Children of Dune. The theory gains traction from the fact that Dune Messiah is notably thin compared to the first novel, focusing on quiet character moments and hushed politics rather than epic action, potentially not providing enough content for a feature-length film. The trailer reveals a 17-year time jump from Part 2, not the standard 12 years from the books, suggesting Villeneuve is restructuring the timeline. Supporters argue this integration is necessary because Villeneuve has described Part 3 as the epic conclusion and his final Dune film, with no confirmation of a Dune 4 on the horizon. However, the counter-argument points to massive logistical difficulties of condensing two books with a 9-year gap between them, and the challenge of introducing the twins, having them born, and then aging them to teenagers all within one film. An alternative theory suggests the twins appear only in Paul's spice-induced visions or as an epilogue sequence, similar to how Alia appeared in Part 2. Chani's blade. A theory argues that Zendaya's Chani might kill Paul Atreides in the third film, a shocking ending that would deviate completely from Herbert's books. This theory, which emerged from analysis after the March 2026 trailer release, references Paul's prescient visions in the films, which have shown possible futures that don't always come to pass. Since Paul's prescient visions show multiple potential futures throughout the series, this unfulfilled possibility remains a narrative thread. The theory gains credibility from Villeneuve's significant alterations to Chani's character, making her skeptical of prophecy and opposed to Paul's messianic transformation, unlike her book counterpart, who remains devoted throughout. Part 2 ends with Chani refusing to accept Paul and riding away on a sandworm in anger, a major departure from the books where she dies in childbirth. Villeneuve stated the trilogy focuses on the story of Paul and Chani struggling with their relationship, and emphasized the adaptation is about the cost of Paul's choices rather than his rise. The theory argues Chani has been positioned as a counterpoint to Paul's corruption, and her killing him would represent the ultimate personal cost of his transformation. The trailer shows Paul with facial scars and a damaged appearance, suggesting physical conflict. While this doesn't happen in the books and remains pure speculation, it would align with Villeneuve's stated thematic goals and his track record of bold creative changes to emphasize Chani as the secret weapon of his adaptation. Prescient Blindness. Trailer footage shows Timothée Chalamet's Paul with scarred, damaged eyes, the result of a devastating stone burner attack that leaves him physically blind, but paradoxically still able to see. A stone burner is an atomic-powered weapon that releases J-rays, a type of radiation that destroys eye tissue and blinds all creatures within its radius. In Dune Messiah, the conspiracy against Paul uses a stone burner during an attack at Otham's house, blinding Paul and his Fedaykin guards physically, but leaving them alive. These weapons can burn to a planetary core if improperly set, though they are not technically classified as atomic weapons under the Great Convention. Paul's prescient powers become so developed by this point that he can still navigate the world by moving through life in lockstep with his visions, foreseeing everything and enacting his visions step by step to observe the slightest details around him. The trailer confirms Paul with red scarring around his eyes and a menacing stare, suggesting the film will depict this transformation. The theory about how Villeneuve will portray this center on the profound metaphor of blindness, representing the ultimate trap of prescience. Paul becomes trapped in a single timeline, losing the freedom to distinguish present from future, creating a haunting paradox where the most powerful being in the universe becomes a prisoner of his own omniscience. This performance challenge for Chalamet involves portraying someone who moves with confidence not because he can see the room, but because he's already seen what will happen. Hayt Programming. Jason Momoa returns in Dune Part 3, not as the loyal Duncan Idaho who died in Part 1, but as Hayt, a Ghola programmed by the Tleilaxu to destroy Paul Atreides. A Ghola is a clone created by the Bene Tleilax from dead flesh and grown in axolotl tanks, fundamentally different from ordinary clones in the Dune universe. After Duncan Idaho was killed by Sardaukar in the 2021 Dune, his body was sold to the Tleilaxu, who created Hayt. This resurrected version is trained as a Mentat and Zensuni philosopher with no memories of the original Duncan, existing as what Robert Pattinson's character Scytale describes as a multi-purpose Ghola. Hayt's primary function is Paul's assassination, with a secondary purpose of seducing and distracting Paul's sister Alia. The programming includes a trigger phrase, "She is gone," meant to activate during Chani's death, compelling Hayt to kill Paul against his will. The dwarf character Bijaz can activate Hayt's programming through a specific humming intonation. In the books, the emotional trauma of the assassination attempt allows Duncan's original memories to resurface, restoring his identity. The theory about Villeneuve's adaptation centers on whether the programming storyline will be altered, particularly regarding when and how it activates, and whether the trigger phrase remains connected to Chani's fate. This creates natural tension where Paul knows his returned friend is a programmed weapon, but cannot abandon him, while Momoa faces the challenge of portraying a character fundamentally different from the heroic Duncan of Part 1. By the way, if you're enjoying this content, I post videos like this regularly. Subscribing would really help out. Barren Possession. Anya Taylor-Joy's character poster shows Alia blood-spattered and screaming, potentially hinting at her descent into abomination and possession by Baron Harkonnen's ego memory. Alia is preborn, meaning she was awakened to consciousness in the womb when Jessica took the water of life, giving her access to the ancestral memories and personalities of all her genetic ancestors. The Bene Gesserit call preborn individuals abominations because they risk ancestral possession, being too young to build a stable personality as a buffer against competing ego memories fighting for control. In the books, primarily in Children of Dune, Alia becomes possessed by Baron Vladimir Harkonnen's personality existing within her genetic memory. The Baron offers to silence the other ancestral voices tormenting her in exchange for periodic control over her actions, leading to her becoming a tyrannical ruler after Paul's exile. Under the Baron's influence, she engages in his decadent behavior and schemes against her own family, eventually ending her own life by jumping from a window rather than face a trial of possession. The character poster showing her screaming with blood on her face and neck suggests this internal struggle might appear in the film. Part 2 mentioned the abomination concept during Jessica's discussions, suggesting Villeneuve is aware of this storyline. This would allow Stellan Skarsgård's return as the Baron's voice or presence, and provide Villeneuve an opportunity to explore horror elements through what amounts to demonic possession via genetic memory. Since this primarily occurs in Children of Dune rather than Messiah, its inclusion would represent a major deviation from the stated source material. Chani Survives. With Part 2 significantly changing Chani's character and removing Paul and Chani's first son, theories abound about whether her tragic childbirth death from the books will happen at all. In Dune Messiah, Princess Irulan secretly drugs Chani with contraceptives to prevent Paul from having heirs, forcing Chani to counteract this with heavy spice consumption to finally conceive. The high spice concentration in her system, combined with the trauma of childbirth, kills her as she gives birth to the twins Leto II and Ghanima. The film version removed the subplot of Paul and Chani's first son, Leto II the Elder, and ended Part 2 with Chani angry at Paul, riding away on a sandworm rather than remaining by his side. 3 competing theories have emerged. The first suggests Chani survives childbirth entirely, breaking from the books to maintain her as a voice of resistance. The second proposes Chani and Paul reconcile off-screen and her death occurs as written, maintaining the emotional devastation central to Paul's arc. The third theory suggests Chani joins the conspiracy against Paul, taking a different role than her book counterpart. Villeneuve emphasized the trilogy's heartbeat is still the relationship between Paul and Chani, giving weight to all possibilities. The trailer shows a brief, tender moment between them, but the context remains unclear whether this is present-day reconciliation, a memory, or another spice vision. This remains one of the biggest uncertainties because Chani's death triggers Paul's complete loss of prescience and final transformation in the books, making any deviation a fundamental alteration to Paul's emotional journey. Vision twins. Despite casting teenage actors as Leto II and Ghanima, some fans theorize the twins will appear only in Paul's prescient visions rather than as actual characters in the film's timeline. This theory draws from how Part 2 handled Aaliyah, who appeared to Paul as an adult in visions despite being unborn, establishing a precedent for showing future versions of characters through prescience. In Messiah, Paul foresees the birth of his daughter Ghanima, but not his son Leto, whose arrival surprises him. The twins are preborn with ancestral memories like Aaliyah, making them significant to the larger Dune saga. The theory suggests that similar to Aaliyah's treatment, the teenage twins appear only in Paul's spice-induced future sight, allowing the film to show Paul foreseeing the consequences of his choices without actually covering those consequences in the narrative timeline. This would explain the teenage casting without requiring a massive time jump deep into Children of Dune territory, and would allow Paul to see his legacy without the film committing to resolving those storylines. However, the counter-argument points to the trailer appearing to show substantial time passage and actual aged characters, making this theory less likely than full integration. The possibility remains because it would provide a practical solution to acknowledging Paul's children and their importance without expanding the scope beyond Messiah. Timeline extension. The Dune Part 3 trailer reveals the story takes place 17 years after Paul's ascension, 5 years more than the 12-year gap in the original Dune Messiah novel. While Dune Messiah is set 12 years after the events of the first book, the trailer specifically states a 17-year time jump from Part 2's ending, representing a confirmed deviation from the source material. The trailer shows Paul's jihad in full swing, with multiple planetary battles, armies conquering worlds, and the full scope of his holy war visualized on screen. The theory about why Villeneuve extended the timeline suggests it allows the film to show more of Paul's galaxy-spanning conquest visually, rather than skipping over it as Herbert did in the novel. The book Messiah deliberately jumps past most of the jihad to focus on its aftermath, but Villeneuve has discussed Part 3 as having more action and thriller elements, suggesting more war content than the relatively quiet political novel. The extra 5 years could accommodate the births and growth of the twins, if they appear in the present-day timeline, and provide expanded room for the conspiracy to develop. This timeline extension signals Villeneuve wants audiences to fully witness what Herbert only described, showing Paul's empire at its height and the human cost of his messianic rule, before depicting its corruption and collapse. 3-faction plot. Trailer footage confirms the multi-faction conspiracy from Dune Messiah, featuring the Spacing Guild, Bene Gesserit, and Tleilaxu working together to overthrow Paul's tyrannical rule. The trailer shows Guild Navigator Edric in his floating sarcophagus filled with spice gas, representing the navigators who are heavily mutated humans breathing concentrated spice to gain limited prescience for space travel. Robert Pattinson plays Cytail, the Tleilaxu face dancer and master shapeshifter who can perfectly mimic the appearance, voice, and personality of others. Face dancers were originally created as entertainment, but evolved into tools for espionage and assassination. The Bene Gesserit involvement brings back Reverend Mother Mohiam, and in the books, Princess Irulan joins the conspirators due to Paul's mistreatment of her. The theory connecting Irulan's clay-covered face to the conspiracy suggests it might serve as protection during conspiracy meetings, preventing face dancers from stealing her appearance. The Stoneburner attack represents the conspiracy's most direct attempt to remove Paul from the throne, and all three factions unite because they want to end Paul's monopoly on prescience and restore the old power structure of the Imperium. Unlike the Harkonnens, who were clear villains, this conspiracy operates in a moral gray area, attempting to stop a genuine tyrant even if their methods are ruthless. The theory about how Villeneuve will adapt this center on whether all the political maneuvering and philosophical discussions from the book can translate to the screen while maintaining the action-packed thriller tone he's promised. Golden Path. Hardcore Dune fans speculate the film might introduce the Golden Path, the prescient vision of humanity's necessary future that Paul sees but cannot bear to follow. The Golden Path is Paul's vision, showing the single timeline where humanity survives long-term, with all other futures leading to human extinction or stagnation. Following this path requires a brutal 3,500-year tyranny to breed humanity's ability to escape prescient vision and ensure species survival. Paul sees the path, but refuses to walk it, considering the cost too high and recoiling from the horror of what it requires. His son Leto II accepts this burden in Children of Dune and becomes the God-Emperor, transforming into a sandworm-human hybrid to live long enough to guide humanity through this necessary oppression. The theory suggests the film might show Paul's visions of the Golden Path without committing to the full Children of Dune storyline, explaining why Paul chooses to walk into the desert rather than continue ruling. This would connect to the Leto Narrator theory, with the future God-Emperor narrating his father's failure to accept the burden. Villeneuve called Messiah his favorite partly because it deconstructs the hero myth, and the Golden Path represents the ultimate deconstruction, where the hero sees the right answer, but proves too human to follow it. While the Golden Path is mainly Children of Dune and God-Emperor territory, introducing it would elevate Part 3 from conclusion to setup for the broader saga, reframing Paul's entire arc as a tragic prelude to his son's even greater sacrifice. If you found this valuable, subscribe so you never miss new content. Thanks for watching.